Hello, everyone. This is Fahad Malaika coming to you from Washington, D.C. with the 11th edition of the NESA Alumni Virtual Interview Series. It's great to be back with you in 2021. Today, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Asanga Abeyagoonasekera, who is an international security analyst and security advisor from Sri Lanka. He was also the founding Director General of the National Security Think Tank of Sri Lanka, INSSSL, under the Sri Lankan Ministry of Defense. He had previously served 15 years in the government and was the former executive director of the government foreign policy think tank known as the Lakshman Kadirgamar Institute. He is currently a visiting lecturer at the University of Colombo and a visiting professor at the Northern Kentucky University. Finally, he is an alumnus of both the NESA Center as well as its sister center in Hawaii, APCSS. We are very excited to announce that Asanga is releasing a new book entitled Conundrum of an Island, Sri Lanka's Geopolitical Challenges. It is currently available in Singapore and will be available in all international stores next month. We will post links to purchase the book in the YouTube video description as well as on our social media outlets. Asanga, thank you for taking the time to join us today. We wanted to take this opportunity to talk about the new book, as well as its main theme, that being Sri Lanka's geopolitical challenges. So that brings me to my first question. First of all, what inspired you to write the book? Over to you.
Thank you, Fahad, for the invitation, and I thank NESA, who I have been working very closely as an alumni, and benefited a lot from the NESA network, and which we are sort of many scholars in South Asia who are involved, and the NESA managed to put us together. So to answer your first question, what inspired me was actually the terrorist attack, 421 attack in Sri Lanka, and we lost so many lives. The book is dedicated to the victims of the terror attack of the 421, and also to a scholar which I admire so much. His name is Professor Vinny Vitarana. Of his long, we lost him last year, but he done tremendous service to his country. So, and also an inspiration to me. Being a direct victim, I was there at the Shangri-La when the bomb went off, and I saw what happened on that day, the security threat that the country has, and also the multiple issues we had, the constitutional coup back then. And I started working on the book during the time of the pandemic, the lockdown. And I would like to thank the reviewers as well as everyone who helped me to put this volume together. I think what inspired me was the incident and the terrorist threat to the country. So.
Thank you, Asanga. That's a great introduction to the book. So what does the title mean? i.e., what is the conundrum of Sri Lanka? Over to you.
Conundrum, basically, when we finished the book, looking for a title with the 5 chapters I've arranged. The chapters are, the first chapter is on national security, then the second is on China in Sri Lanka. The third is geopolitics, basically tapping into the regional as well as the larger Indo-Pacific and BRI strategies. The next is on sustaining democracy in the country, on investing in liberal democratic values that we have cherished in the country. And the final basically also discuss on leadership, the gaps in the policy making. So it's about the last article which I write is about Martin Luther King's leadership, a call of reminding to the world also the importance of such thinking to create a more a society where we sort of respect each and everybody's dignity and values of minority, maybe the minority issue, or be it a religious issue, or cultural norms that we sort of what we are facing. So the pandemic that sort of we have faced, we got closer. All of us as humans, we try to sort of solve our own problems. So we try to. So I've captured the time of the pandemic also, on basically touching on the systemic risks, referring to Professor Ian Golden, who has taught me at Oxford on the systemic risks that have been ignored by us, the humans, and the various warnings which we had. So the conundrum, the confusing problem that Sri Lanka has is on the not understanding the geopolitics, and also the failed the foreign policy that it has sort of been trying to practice, but it is not working well. The conundrum is the instability which we sort of bring into the country, because that we cannot balance our foreign policy well. So that is the conundrum, and which trickles down to domestic political issues, which trickles down to many of the policy making. So the book basically questions on various. It directly reflects on, for example, the $480 million grant which was given by the United States, the MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, why it was not accepted, and then why certain agreements are accepted. The Chinese, the BRI footprint in the country. Sri Lanka has been quoted many times in the global arena on debt trap, debt trap diplomacy. So I kind of go down and sort of understand, trying to sort of bring out what is the narrative, what is the real narrative on the debt trap. The volume, is it the volume where the government says, look, subsequent governments have been saying the volume of the Chinese loans are not so much. I mean, it is the volume of the private bonds are much more. That's not the question. The question is the opaqueness of the loans, the transparency, and on the processes. On the 99-year lease on Hambantota, the process that was how it was given was the question. I think China, as one of it's the largest trading partner now in Sri Lanka. I kind of project, I call it the triangular power projection in Sri Lanka, which is the India, China, and the US in Sri Lanka and in Sri Lankan waters, which is the Indian Ocean, and the strategic neck of water, which is Indian Ocean connecting to the South China Sea. I see this as my assessment is basically, I agree with most of the scholars, such as the Australian scholar Rory Medcalf, David Bruce. Many of the thinking I have brought into this book. I've also visited few of the past scholars like Hans Morgenthau, basically even Mersheimer's work, Stephen Wall. There are a lot of references. There is a theoretical side to it, and there is. I project it. I basically explain it in a way that I look at the domestic issues, then I catapult out of the country to the region and to the larger geographical or mental map of Indo-Pacific or BRI. Then I can come back again to the country and start discussing about the domestic policies. So I think it is the conundrum which I capture is about the binary hedging foreign policy, which has weakened the country.
Thank you, Asanga. It's great that you mentioned Martin Luther King as we celebrated his birthday earlier this week here in the States. So I'm sure our fellow NESA alumni from neighbor countries are wondering, have you captured the regional security dimension in your book? Over to you.
Yes, Fahad. The security chapter basically, I touched the regional security architecture, what the regional security problems, the issues we are facing, the non-traditional security issues. I mean, be it the climate change, be it the terrorism, extremism. I do some comparative work on bombs and elections, which I find several reviews quite interesting already. Where I see a pattern of in South Asia where bombs and elections have a connection, and whether the results, the end results, how it sort of affects the end results of the elections, be it the Balakot attack in India, be it the Sri Lankan Easter Sunday attack, be it the Benazir Bhutto's attack. So there are so many cases, but it is quite unique to South Asia. So I get into certain analysis part on certain papers which I've written, and also the more on the maritime issues, which I have captured, the maritime security issues, where I think basically talking about a rules-based order, the importance of following the global the norms, as well as the international laws. So how Sri Lanka could play a role, being part of the sandwich between the BRI and Indo-Pacific, but playing a role, a more responsible role as a littoral state. The Indian influence, for example, even the recent visit of Dr. Jaishankar, the Foreign Minister of India, a few days ago, on basically speaking of the Indian projects, which was being reviewed right now. And there is some reference to why such things happen in the policy making issues. For example, there was an article on the news saying on the Jaishankar's visit that Chinese intelligence was behind blocking the Indian project, the terminal project in Colombo Port, East Container Terminal. The terminal project was to be given to India and Japan, but it has been reviewed and blocked right now by the government. So the report basically says, the newspaper report which Jaishankar has highlighted, saying that the Chinese are behind this. Now, my assessment is that more than the Chinese, it is done by the Sri Lankan policymakers. So, because one could even say that some of the protests which happened in Hambantota against the Chinese could have been work of the Indian. So it's more than that. It's more of the domestic policies that are taken. I think because of the strategic choices we have made, like the previous government which gave the terminal, as well as reviewing by this government, the inconsistency of the strategic choices that we have sort of made, and we are not willing to continue, puts us in a great danger, in instability. So there's bringing the instability towards the country. Certain questions, such as the security issues, I touch on the 30-year war, which we had, the post-war on reconciliation. Why Sri Lanka needs to talk about genuine reconciliation to the Tamilian as well as the Tamilian diaspora. Here is a country which co-sponsored its own resolution in Geneva back in 2015. And then you have three narratives by three foreign ministers after that in subsequent occasions, giving three narratives. So there is no consistency and then you have finally withdrawing from the UNHRC. Some of the I would say semi-autocratic footprint that slowly creeps into the country, I saw it as a huge danger. The analysis, even on the Trump administration, on certain policies, such as withdrawing from the larger, the multilateral institutions, put us at serious danger. I've highlighted multiple times in the book on those issues. So right now, I'm actually happy of what's going on the US policies, where the Secretary, National Security Advisor, a few days ago, Jake Sullivan, has mentioned about the importance of reaching out to the allies, the like-minded partners, the democratic nations, and strengthening the relationship, and not an isolationist position in the earlier administration. But I see a lot of hope in that statement. As a literal state, far from the United States, but very important geostrategic location, situated in geostrategic location. On the security, I reach out also to the undersea operations, the surveillance that's going on. Basically, even the recent the drones that were found in Indonesia, the Chinese surveillance ship, the oceanographic expeditions that's going on. So I refer to some of the work, basically saying that the coastal defense, which the British made back in the 19th century. So even the first coastal tower, I have a reference of the British importance of coastal surveillance during the British Empire's time. But what's happening is much more sophisticated. The oceanographic surveys, the civilian military, the nexus of the Chinese, which is blurred, and which would have some serious security threats to the region. So the India's as a net security provider, as well in the region has been sort of been pushed, as well as been is a question. So if you look at the India's vicinity, what the Chinese engagement has been. So Sri Lanka clearly is, you have a clear tilt towards the BRI because of the present the regime, Rajapaksa regime, who is sort of welcomed with open hands on the BRI, as well as the many during the COVID time, also the pandemic time, its assistance, and the recent $400 million which was accepted are also signs that the Sri Lanka wish to be more towards the BRI, the foreign policy. But here there are some questions I raise on basically when we have a foreign policy like that, how it sort of affects our national security, the national even the policies that we have. So how it sort of trickle down, as well as directly affects the policy. So rather than being in the seeing that China or US, the binaries, so I sort of my analysis and my recommendation is being with the middle powers, a more comfortable zone for nations like Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, in the foreign policy, back in the 2000s, by the Mahinda Rajapaksa or by Gotabaya Rajapaksa, right now, the brother clearly mentions about non-aligned. Rhetorically, they use the term non-aligned, but it is no more valid right now. But some of the principles of non-aligned, yes, we can bring in the values, but here they use the term balanced also, and also sometimes they use the term equidistance also, not realizing that all the there are three different terms. But they use it in their election manifestos as saying that we are balanced with all, especially Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who clearly mentions that we don't want to be entangled with great power rivalries. But the question I ask is basically, will the big powers allow you to sort of be in this position, or will they allow you to sort of remain in a balanced position? So my sort of assessment is that Sri Lanka should be more towards a multi-aligned foreign policy, aligned with all, as well as a broad-based and following a more broad-based realist foreign policy. This was narrated by even when the foreign policy position was mentioned, that rhetorically sometimes we mention, like the foreign secretary who said that it is an India first foreign policy, but then again subsequently after a few weeks he said no, we Sri Lanka first foreign policy. So here is the conundrum that that islands like Sri Lanka is stuck because of the economic situation of the country. As you can see, basically the Sri Lankan economy has been hit really hard after the Easter Sunday. Then comes the pandemic, and so we are struggling quite a lot. 90% of its revenue is used for debt, paying debts, as well as servicing debts. So I think these are serious concerns, which also affects the national security. I also speak on the importance of a national security, national defense policy, which was actually prepared and during the former regime. Actually Sri Lanka, I refer to the work of Narasimha Rao in 1990, where he mentions even to India the importance, how important it is to have a national defense policy clearly articulated, presented to the general public. We could learn lessons from many of these ideas from statesmen. So it's sort of a reference back and forth, like I mentioned, on there is even statement from Vajpayee. There is assessments on the extremist threat, which is threatening the entire region. And yes, so many areas, including the non-traditional security, like climate change issues, which killed, from landslides, we have a few years ago, we lost about 200 lives. So these are serious issues. I think it's time that we relook at it.
As you mentioned at the outset, China's influence in Sri Lanka is one of the themes of the book. Despite the details being incredibly complex around the Hambantota port deal with China, perceptions persist that Sri Lanka is caught up in China's debt diplomacy. So how do you think that perception issue should be addressed? Over to you.
It's a very important question, Fahad. This perception issues need to be addressed because Sri Lanka needs to be very clear on its borrowings, on the loans that is continuously taking from China. So the problem here is not the volume, which the government's narrative, or some of the experts say that, look, China's volume is not so big. The volume of the entire volume of Chinese loans is less than the sovereign bonds, or as well as the other private bonds. But it's not about the volume. It is about, the problem is about the opaqueness. It is the conditionality of these loans. So the narrative, what is out there, is correct, Fahad. It is correct because are we in some sort of a trap? That's where the question is. I mean, if we don't get our processes right, if we are not sort of transparent, For example, the last loan which we received when the ambassador, the senior ambassador, came to Sri Lanka, and this was about 400 million. And so here, this has to be clear to our people. What are the conditionality of that loan? How much will be used on what sort of development project? And some of the development projects has not given us the returns, basically, that was expected. Hambantota Port is one of them, Matalaya Port is one of them. The returns, if the question is not only in Sri Lanka, in many other places, so China needs to improve those. The processes, Sri Lanka also, I begin the geopolitics chapter from Mahinda Rajapaksa's statement, where he clearly mentions that we wanted the project. It was not China who wanted the project. I asked from China, and China gave the money to me. And I did, if India or United States or anybody else, but willing to give, I would accept it. But they were not willing to assist me. This was the quote that I start the geopolitics chapter. So here is a country who's coming forward to assist with large amounts of money. Here is it's a developing structure. If you look at it, what China is addressing is what was left. Back then, if the infrastructure was most of the infrastructure was developed by the British, and then after gaining independence, Sri Lanka didn't have a highway until the Chinese built it. So you see tremendous work. Basically the geosphere or the geography of Sri Lanka, they are altering it. Even the Chinese are reclaiming land. It's called the Port City Project, 6 hectares of land. The massive investments they are investing, and these projects now they started after the BRI or before, sometimes before BRI. But they're tagged with the BRI. They're called, all these projects are called, they're part of the BRI. It's okay. It's just that our policymakers should be clever, as well as should make the right decisions when they are making basically borrowing from the Chinese. And if projects like Matalaya Port, there's no flights coming in, the supporting infrastructure is still not there. Probably in the future, in the long run, yes, there would be benefits from it, but then we need to calculate basically the returns from this. And this is where the question is, and the question is obviously correct on the debt trap issues, on whether there is. The Chinese always say that they're here for development work, economic development. Is there any? The question is, if there is no returns from most of these infrastructure projects, so is that a strategic footprint, or is there a strategic thinking behind? Are they looking to stay for a long time in Sri Lanka? So I think, yes, they're here to stay. They're here to stay for a long time. Because the Chinese thinking is you have to understand this. I think the book would be important because it brings an Eastern thinking to some of the Western scholars out there. So it is basically trying to understand the civilizational, the ancient civilizational thinking that the Chinese had. And then they're trying to sort of move from that ancient civilizational past to being a nation state on making reforms. But still, they're experimenting. For me, my assessment is that they're still experimenting in their reforms. But China is making inroads in Sri Lanka. That has to be understood by the Sri Lankans. For example, the Chinese Communist Party, the recent seminar that was conducted, the China Reform, CRF, Reform Foundation, which has talks with certain think tanks who are funding think tanks. So one has to be, has to look at these things also. What are the reforms they are suggesting? What are the reforms they are suggesting to the democracy? Is this an alternative model that has been discussed? One policy maker in the government, one of the Basil Rajapaksa, his president's brother, one of the strategists, he mentions that this model is really good. The Chinese model is really good. What they're making this statement is because looking at the tremendous economic growth of China, thinking that this is the structure, this is the model that they should adopt. But no, I don't think so. The problem is China is also still at the stage of experimenting that model, because China, although we call it communist, it has a strong Leninist structure which needs to be understood. And what it has is Leninist structure is built in, but then you have, although they opened, they benefited from the liberal, the trade, the values or the norms after Deng Xiaoping, who introduced many of the reforms. One should understand the structures, how the Lenin structure works, and how it sort of influenced is quite different, and how it works is quite different. So you cannot sort of assess the Chinese model only on the economic development side, because yes, democracy. Here, I think the pandemic, some of the sections where I discuss, there is a serious threat to liberal democracies from the pandemic, because there have been questions on basically do we have a failed system in place? If you look at the WHO, some of the engagement by the global leaders. So there is questions on liberal democracies. There are sort of this was you could see in certain countries, developing nations like Uganda, who try to make constitutional reforms during the pandemic. Sri Lanka also did a constitutional reform during the pandemic, and these, there are times that there are low moments in liberal democracies where semi-autocratic processes could creep in, and this is a danger to countries like Sri Lanka. I think the policymakers should look at the longer-term horizon and not the shorter-term economic benefits. So the book basically it's a prescription to the policymakers to look at the longer term view, and rather than sort of working on what is right now the situation, but then coming up with short-term remedies.
Thank you, Asanga. That is a great segue into my next question. The current COVID-19 pandemic is another theme that you cover within the book. So how have Sri Lanka's views on geostrategic competition changed during the pandemic? Over to you.
I captured the mass diplomacy or the COVID diplomacy carried out. Here is a time, the book is released during the time when the vaccine was introduced. So you have vaccine diplomacy right now. The entire 2021, I think, will be about vaccine diplomacy. The nations, such as developing nations, that's why I mentioned earlier, should be cautious, because some of the illiberal or semi-autocratic models which try to sort of creep in to liberal democracies, you should sort of be cautious on that, because pandemic is a moment where people think we need a reset, a new norm. But we had how I assess it is that we had a low moment of our of our time in democracy, even back then. Even the torchbearer of the liberal democracy, the United States, had some serious, I would say, challenges in speaking on the topic, because it was about a person only who's tried to sort of influence. But you can see there's the structures that held the values of democracy. So I think it's very important that you preserve it. I know that Sri Lanka, we went through a 20th amendment to the constitution. Now this is passing the legislative powers more towards the executive. And back in the 19th amendment, we passed from the executive powers more towards the legislature. So we are going back and forth. And this exercise will not help to create stability. This exercise will not help to ensure national security, as well as the exercise, shifting back and forth is not the way to go. The of power. Now, most of the argument is that having more powers to the executive would create stability, more stability. I have a paper on that, basically a chapter where on the political assessment, I discuss about a Leviathan, why Sri Lankan people are now. Earlier, back then, when the Rajapaksa lost in 2015, we moved into a more open, liberal, democratic values. We embraced the Sirisena Wickremesinghe, the first bipartisan government, where two parties who are sort of fighting from the independence. The United National Party, and also the SLPP, the SLFP, Sri Lanka Freedom Party. So the two parties got together. This was the only moment that you see in the Sri Lankan political history. But speaking on the liberal democracy, but after some time, the bipartisan part, the depolarization, they didn't work together, and this was revealed by the Easter Sunday Commission, or the Parliamentary Commission, which was appointed, where the cohabitation did not happen, and this was one of the reasons for the security threat to creep in. Where I write about the Leviathan, this stronger leader, was because I saw how the society was calling for a strong individual to control the institutions, as well as the weakening of certain sectors such as security and various others. So here is the solution came after a few years, which is Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was a former military officer, and who came in the national security to protect the sovereignty, was his election campaign slogan. So here, I think from the learning of after Gotabaya coming into power, so few months after the pandemic was the first hurdle that he had to face, and keeping such leaders not only in Sri Lanka, you would see a pattern where sort of using the military as the last resort to on contact tracing, be it on basically handling the entire situation. So what we have to sort of understand is that exercising these powers is one thing, but then Leviathan should have another face, which is I bring in the liberal values, the John Locke and the liberal values. So two sides of it, and this is something that I think it's very important that we exercise, because the pandemic is not a moment that you tighten the grip and bring in malign mercantilist practices to the country. on import restrictions. They're not the time to exploit basically the autocratic footprint. So it is a time that I think that you should also protect the liberal democratic values. So that's something that I sort of bring out in the pandemic, and also the systemic risks, which I sort of highlighted earlier, the systemic risk that has been ignored in our systems. So the book begins with a poem by Seamus Heaney, which I admire that poem a lot, and it's called Scaffolding. And while you're building construction, how he speaks on the importance of when you want to let go of the scaffolds, you got to have strong structures. So we have systemic issues because if you look at these structures that was built, quite weak. So here is basically the political environment where you are touching the structures, the constitutional reform, where Sri Lanka is going to have a total constitutional reform in a few months, or they are talking about it right now. You are basically speaking of the structures, and the structures that was very weak, and it was not addressed in the past. So, such as the minority issue, the devolution of power, basically talking on the 13th Amendment. So the provincial council minister right now in the government says that he's not for the provincial council, and he's not for the devolution. So these are wrong steps. I think one should look at the importance, how much of investments that we made for the devolution, and work towards it because these are solutions for reconciliation also with the minority community. So here, the political situation, the changes I have taken into account, the Sinhalese Buddhist footprint, which brought Gotabaya to power, and their demands on basically the norms, as well as on be it the UN Human Rights Council, the Tamilian issue. So there are many references to South India on the Tamilian issue, the diaspora re-engagement strategy, which is a diaspora, the Tamilian diaspora, how important. And you cannot do selective reconciliation. This is something that I want to, that's an important area which I have highlighted. Sri Lanka, after the 2009 war victory, was on a reconciliation footing. And then we spoke about genuine reconciliation, but where the problem is, the governments have been, or their policies have been unselective. So we will not reconcile with this particular group of the diaspora. We will reconcile only with these people, or the Tamilian people. The former LTT cadres, you would have to reconcile with them. So you would have to bring a more holistic approach. So the symbolic values that has been taken out or been demolished, or the days I speak about, that where the Tamilians commemorate their heroes' days, or as a victim, a direct victim from the LTT. I think it's really important to look at basically and respect what each and every person has individually, and their grievances. Demolishing an ideology doesn't go away, so it's the symbolic demolition or suppressing of it will not help at all to bring in genuine reconciliation. So it's really, really important that Sri Lanka invest in the right policies and make these right decisions.
Thank you, Asanga. So that brings me to my final question. You have written about the maritime power dynamics among the United States, China, and India in this book and elsewhere. What would you like to see from the new Biden presidency with respect to Sri Lanka or South Asia or to the Indo-Pacific more broadly? Over to you.
Yes, the definitely. I will look forward for. I mean, the Biden presidency on few areas. One is re-engagement in the multilateral institutions, which is already he's done. He's and he has made his sort of pledge to sort of be with the multilateral order. So which is really good. The that's actually a good start. And the isolation is the foreign policy, which I referred to Jake Sullivan saying that about the allies. It's really important that you invest in allies, and you invest in liberal democratic order to sustain or remain in certain countries, be it Uganda or what they are going through right now. I see some of the pandemic time have been taken as an opportunity by this autocratic, some of the semi-autocratic regimes to sort of, suppress the values. So it's important that Biden invest in this as well as speak about it. I'm sure he would. And this is really required, even in the security realm, in the Pacific or Indian Ocean. It's really important that you have the Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, the IPSR, clearly highlights Sri Lanka about 13 times. The Sri Lanka strategic position, its importance, but there was not much of investment done in the security of the region. If you look at it, South Asia is one of the least integrated regions in terms of security. We just had a tripartite agreement with Maldives, India, and Sri Lanka, which was discussed back in 2014, but only now we managed to sign it. The reason for the delay for the tripartite agreement was because of a China factor in Maldives, that the Chinese influence in Maldives. So China factor does come in to the region, but I think it's really, really important that we, rather than the minilaterals, such as the trilateral which we signed, it's important that we look at the multilateralism as well as invest in it. I mean, China is also investing in multilateralism. They are speaking about multilateralism, but here is, I think, what I expect from Biden is to sort of to be and also to speak more on the rules-based order, and also about the international norms and international laws much more, and strengthen the human rights basically in different countries, and address these issues. And because we don't need to sort of keep on. I mean, you see policymakers moving for the last five years, what I saw, 5-6 years. They're limiting their decision making when it comes to sort of making clear decisions on being or speaking about the international norms. They're a bit reluctant to speak about the international norms, or this is quite dangerous also, that nations like Sri Lanka, who have invested heavily on the law of the sea, be it in 1970s or in the Indian Ocean Zone for peace. Sri Lanka has played a tremendous role back in the past. Now, these are values which we could bring from the policies of non-aligned, these are important areas. But when it comes to the factor of China in the Indian Ocean, I think certain countries, like sort of doesn't speak on the certain aggressions or any strategic choices China makes. So I think it's really important to speak about it and to discuss and get BRI into a more multilateral venue. So BRI actually can also be in a multilateral venue. And it's important that we shift it. Even the Asian Investment Bank, AIIB, we could move that also to that platform. So it's important that that Biden invest in these areas, and bring back the what was missing in the region. So the security or the threat, the first chapter, which I call the 421 attack, in Sri Lanka would have never happened. It was, I mean, Indians did inform even in the last minute, but then if we had a regional security, a strong regional security architecture, a multi-jurisdictional or multi-pronged approach in intelligence sharing established, if we had this strengthened architecture or regional security architecture, then we wouldn't have to sort of, we wouldn't have to go through these issues, and those deaths wouldn't have happened. So here is a weak structures that we have, and it's important that that Biden or extra regional powers assist the regional countries to establish these regional mechanisms.
Asanga, thank you so much for taking the time to join the interview series. I know that our audience will greatly appreciate all of your candid insights. Hopefully we can meet again in person in the near future. To everyone watching from home, we wish you happiness, safety, and good health. And again, make sure that you grab a copy of Asanga's new book. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you, Fahad. Thank you very much.